Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
You're not just Katie, you're Katie, the winner of Sea to Summit. Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Jim, that's old news. I feel like this happened a little while ago now, but I really appreciate the congratulations. And yeah, still haven't totally wrapped my head around what happened a couple weeks ago.
Well, this is releasing the week after your podcast comes out with Elena, hearing the Sea to Summit race story, but everybody should go back and listen to it because it's such a good story. It's so cool. Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah. And I really think that all the lessons that I took out of that podcast still do hold. All these cliches about like believing in yourself and not giving up. I'm someone who's often skeptical of those very optimistic and woo-woo takes on things, but I actually now am a true believer. So believe in yourself and never give up.
That's right. You lived it. Great. So wait, so I know there's a ton of great lessons from that podcast, but did you pick up other stuff at Sea to Summit that you want to discuss with us today?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking actually to start off our coaching and training insights, I could share a few more Sea to Summit insights in case anybody is interested in hearing them, just because I find that processing races takes a little bit of time. So I recorded that first episode the day after it happened, and now it's been a little while. And I think I have a little bit more perspective to just share other things that I've been remembering. So one thing that I was thinking about a little bit leading into Sea to Summit is whether it's useful to scope out the competition before you actually race. Because part of the Sea to Summit lead up, there was a Zoom call the week of the race where everybody who was racing hopped on the Zoom call. And so we could all see each other. And I talked a little bit about how I had retreated into my performance bubble to sort of take any pressure off. And then I remember being on that call and seeing the names of everybody who was racing. And I did recognize some names on that list. And it definitely scared me a little bit. And I did feel the pull to look up like, okay, well, what has everybody raced and what are they going to do? And ultimately, I think that actually created probably more stress and anxiety than not doing that would have. But I don't know. What do you think, Jim? Should we be looking up the competition before we race?
Well, it's so natural. You know that everybody on that race who was going to be competitive and probably be in the top 5 or top 10 was doing exactly what you were doing, which was people were madly Googling people, stalking them and looking at all their results. So yeah, I think it's totally natural. But yeah, obviously you said like it's not useful. It just creates a lot of stress, and you race who shows up. But I do think in the long term though, it is interesting if you do want to be a competitive triathlete. I think there is some sort of benchmarking that can go on. So, I think a lot of us who want to be competitive in any sport, we're always looking at the results, going, how fast did that person go? Who are they? And then the names start to become familiar, and you start to understand people's paces. And I think that can be a good, if you're trying to work your way up through the ranks. Like it provides a good way of saying, hey, for example, like I have to go from a 8-minute pace to a 7:30 pace to be competitive in my age group in this Olympic race. And so you and your coach can talk about that. And that could be a goal that you could try to go after either for the winter or spring, for the next year, or maybe it's a 2-year project, but whatever it is. So I think the benchmarking is important, but not really like the scoping the competition the day before.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think maybe learn a little bit more about what the paces are of the winners than what the identity is. A specific person isn't so much more than their paces when you're looking at them on a spreadsheet like that. So maybe just saying, what are the age group winners swimming, biking, and running, and trying to gear towards that. If you're minutes off those paces, then you might need to make some changes or invest more heavily in one of the 3 disciplines if you really got to bring your run up, for example, to be competitive. I like that way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think it sort of brings up that imposter syndrome, right? So when I moved, I used to race a lot in Anchorage, Alaska, as folks know, and then there, everybody knows everybody. So you race people week after week after week, whether it's in bike racing, run racing, or triathlon, and you kind of know when you show up at the race, like who's going to finish first or where kind of you're going to finish. So there really isn't a lot of mystery. And then when I moved back east in 2015, I started racing a lot of triathlons around New England, and I'd show up and I'd be like, oh my God, look at all these in shape people. I am going to get destroyed today. I hope I don't come in last. Like maybe come in the middle of the age group or something. And of course it always worked out that it would do just fine, but I'd always be surprised at the race. It was like, I can't believe I did that well against these people. And that went on for years and years and years. So it is a really powerful thing. And I felt really, really confident in my triathlon ability. And I still really suffered from that race day. Like, wow, I'm going to get wiped out today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I felt that the day before at check-in. Honestly, I felt a little bit of confidence leading up into the race, but then seeing people was a little bit harder for me. So I guess maybe a lesson I can take out of this experience is these people don't impact how fast you can go. They might impact placing in some way. They might not. You really have no idea, but just focus on you and focus on what you can control. And you can't really control what's going to happen on race day. And this actually reminds me, Jim, I don't think we've told this story on the podcast before, but at my very first Ironman at Lake Placid, we had done a little bit of scoping of my age group. And there was one girl who had won the age group at Lake Placid every single year for the last several years. She was just about my age. She'd been, I think, top 5 in the age group at Kona multiple times. She was an absolute stud. And I knew she was racing at Lake Placid that year. So I totally detached any expectation of doing well in the age group or winning because she was so strong. And I saw her at the beginning of the swim. I knew she was there. I looked her up. And she actually had started the race with a fever. She was sick and she got off the bike 5 miles in and didn't finish. And, you know, who knows what would have happened, but you never know on race day what's going to happen. You never know who's going to get a mechanical. You never know who's going to get lost and go 20 minutes off course. Not that that's ever happened to me in any capacity or whatever. But just don't count yourself out is maybe another lesson here, just because fast people are showing up, because really anything can happen.
Yeah. And there's something particularly intimidating about triathlon, like say with all the tri bikes, and you say, oh my God, look at the stats, a $15,000 bike, and look at that disc wheel, and look how deep those wheels are. And that person just got all the right gear, and they're sponsored by a team. And it may just be they bought the kit from somebody, but like all these things combined to like, that person must be so fast and so professional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we just got to control the controllables. And I will say it's really gratifying to pass someone who's on a more expensive bike than you by like an order of magnitude, by thousands of dollars. You're like, yeah, I got this. All right. So that's my first insider question. Next one here, I would like to shout out to the Ironman distance for being really, really, really hard. Because I did this race, my time was about 7.5 hours, which is considerably faster than an Ironman would be. And I had a hike with 5 miles and 4,200 feet of elevation gain instead of running a marathon on the road. And I think I didn't fully appreciate how different those two stimuli would be. I was kind of like, yeah, this is sort of an adventure Ironman-y race. But my body has felt so different and has recovered, honestly, so much faster from this race than it has from Ironmans. Because I think, honestly, 26 miles of pounding on pavement is a nice way to really wreck your body. And similarly, I think I've been a lot more sore after even just 70.3s. So really want to shout out to anyone who has done an Ironman this year. One of my mantras during Sea to Summit was, I am so glad this is not an Ironman. When I could get off the bike at 95 miles, that felt awesome. And then when I knew that my run was going to be less than 2 hours, I hit the hour mark and I was like, I'm more than halfway done. This is amazing. So shout out to people doing Ironman. Ironman is really, really, really hard. And if you're interested in something a little bit different, you should definitely check out Sea to Summit.
Yeah. I think we should just name our podcast. Like the title should be Ironman is hard. Like episode 43, episode 44. Ironman's hard. Oh my God.
Yeah, we're going to have a new segment, Coaching and Training Insights, Ironman is hard.
Exactly. But you're so right. Like, yeah, and also like Sea to Race Summit is such a cool event. Everybody should check it out. The swim is half of Ironman, which is a big deal, right? You can go off and do a half and not feel like you got to go eat everything at the local cafe. And then it's all uphill. And so all there is just concentric and there's really no eccentric loading whatsoever. And just it's uphill. And so it's a certain type of pain, right? A certain type of skill to go uphill. But you're right, man, 5 miles up in Mountain Washington is so different than that 26.
Definitely. And that segues exactly into my next insight, which is that uphill technical power hiking on rocks is not the same skill as road running. And I didn't really appreciate how specialized of a skill that was until I was in the race. And I did have kind of a surprising run where I just ran people down. But the truth is, I think it's super hard to prep for that if you haven't spent years and years and years hiking in the whites. And I've even done a fair amount of trail running out west, but there it's usually pretty flowy and there's switchbacks and it's not the same as the straight uphill single-legged squat lunge over and over and over again. So I think if you want to do a race like this, you need to be doing strength training that's preparing you for this type of terrain. And even more importantly, you need time on feet on this terrain. And I'm glad that I did a lot of race sims that involved literally doing an uphill power hike off the bike. It's a very specialized thing, but I think it might be my sweet spot. So interested to keep doing that.
I think so. Yeah, there needs to be more of these races out there. But also another thing you mentioned just off air before we started the podcast was I think you maybe passed a couple of folks who were wearing gear, or maybe shoes that just weren't appropriate for the mountain environment. So that's another thing is like your gear choice was spot on because you've done this. You knew which shoes to wear. Make a huge difference.
Definitely, yeah. And I've actually plugged these shoes before on the podcast as a gear pick of the week, but the Salomon S-Lab Ultra were great for me. They're really grippy, but also light. And so they were good for the first mile or so where I was on the road and running. But then I had no problem just kind of scampering up the rocks, even though some of them were wet. There are streams everywhere. So definitely choose your gear widely. And this is not a time to have like a carbon shoe. This is not going to help you because you're not going to run more than about 0.8 miles of this trail. The rest of it is just a totally different skill.
Another thing that reminded me of that you were talking about, but there's such a quick feet, brain feet connection to trail running and being out in the mountains. And you've got tons of experience in the mountains, so you have that. And I think other thing we've noticed also is some of our friends who come from, say, like lacrosse or soccer, these sports where there's a lot of running, but there's a lot of footwork. Like they're kind of naturals in the mountains as well too. So if you are one of those athletes coming from those sports and you are interested in trail running the mountains, I think generally you guys have a kind of a natural built-in advantage.
Yeah. And honestly, it is so fun. Your brain's doing a lot of work. You're cognitively thinking about like, what is each step? What is the line that I'm going to take? What is the most efficient way to get where I'm going? And I think maybe people actually underestimate the cognitive load of doing that because you can get pretty tired even just mentally. Like I'm sure we've talked about this before, but finishing up a Prezi Traverse, you are tired mentally because you've been thinking about every single step you've taken for 40,000 steps or whatever it is. And so here too, you want to be optimizing, and maybe that's something other people might not have totally bargained for because you don't need to do that in road running. It's just one foot in front of the other, pick a point, run to that point. Here, if you're running to a point, you're going to fall over. Like I have totally eaten shit on these trails before, and I'm glad that I didn't this time. You've witnessed it, Jim, many a time, usually downhill. But yeah, it's a big mental load as well as a physical one.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, so last insight here. I have talked about this a little bit before, but I am living it right now. So I think it is pretty common to encounter some sleep issues after a big race. And this is especially common the night or two after. And it makes sense. It's because your cortisol, which is a stress hormone, basically goes to level midnight right after you do a really, really big race like this. And you've probably also taken in a good amount of caffeine. As soon as I crossed the finish line, actually, my mom was there and she's like, is there anything I can get you? And the Mount Washington Visitor Center was there. And I was like, Mom, I really need a Coke because there wasn't any Coke. There's no aid stations in this race. But then, of course, like downing a huge Coke in the afternoon, I had extra caffeine kind of coursing through my veins, an insane amount of adrenaline. And as a result, I did not sleep well that night. And honestly, have not really slept well for several nights after that. I find that my body will get kind of hungry and thirsty at weird times. Elena has talked about with the 100 mile, where it's such a big expenditure that you can't kind of just regulate into your usual, like I get hungry 3 times a day and then I have snacks. It's like I'm kind of nauseous, but then I like eat a little bit and then I'm hungry at 4 a.m. So all this is to say, my sleep is not great, but some things that I've been doing to fight against that is, number one, just rest, even if you can't sleep. There's something to be said for deep rest, lying down, try to stay off your phone. If you need to, you can like read or something chill, but I've been doing that. I've become a professional napper, so I've been napping during the day. I'm coming off an awesome morning nap today, which is not something that I do very often, but at times I find that I need it. So just listening when my body says, hey, I actually am ready to sleep now. And then trying to just push the fueling and hydration as much as possible. I'm barely doing any activity, but I need to be eating like I'm training for an Ironman and hydrating like I'm training for an Ironman, because your body is still in this really amped state where your metabolism is just absolutely firing and you really want to answer to it. So yeah, that's what I'm working on to optimize my sleep.
Yeah, well, good job. Sounds like you're doing all the right things. Sounds like things that, and you must listen to a podcast. These 2 people who talk about these things, and 3 people actually.
Yeah, I think I've heard of it once or twice.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually, so I'm talking about sleep right now and recovery. That's going to segue us into our main topic. But before we do that, you've got some good insights, Jim, and then we have a fun segment bringing us back to Ironman like Placid. So why don't we start with your coaching and training insights?
Sure. Yeah, we have a smorgasbord today. I like this. Okay. All right. So my first one here is called "Be the Verb and Not the Noun." I'm very guilty of this, but a lot of us will identify as like, I'm a triathlete, or I'm a runner, or I'm an ultra runner, or even like I'm a liberal, I'm a conservative, whatever. But it's just sort of this reminder, like, to be careful with identity. And I say this mostly for myself, and reminding myself, is because that identity can just lock you into a specific set of beliefs or ideology about yourself, or kind of like your worldview. It's a very narrow way of looking at the world. And so for me, I just have to remember that, like, I'm a dynamic, open, evolving being. And so I do like to swim, bike, and run. And I will say, yes, sure, people ask me, like, yes, I am a triathlete, but I just try to be kind of careful with like that noun. And then I read something sort of around this, which was swimmer Lydia Jacoby. She was talking about her severe depression she experienced after winning a gold medal in Tokyo when she was 17. And she said, I was feeling like my identity was locked up in sports. The biggest thing for me lately is remembering that being a swimmer is something I do. It's not something I am. I have so many interests and passions. I have amazing friends and family outside of the sport. Remembering those things is a big thing for me. So I just thought those were really wise words and kind of summed up what this "be the verb, not the noun."
That's super wise. Yeah. And I think it is okay to say I'm a triathlete, but I am also a coach and a researcher and a friend and like a wife and all these things, like running down the list of the things that really make you you. And when you do that, you might realize that the triathlete one is not actually at the top. And if it is at the top, maybe that's a good time to do a little bit of reshuffling and think about these other core elements. And I don't know, Jim, I think this speaks too to like going through a major injury, right? You know, you're a triathlete, but right now you can't really run and it's been hard to bike the way that you like to, or maybe swim the way you like to. And that doesn't mean you're not a triathlete, but it means maybe you can be investing in these other things that you are too, to feel, I don't know if that's been your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to look back on this and just be like, just really grateful. Again, I've said this before, but I'm just grateful for this time. And even then we talked about like a couple of podcasts ago about sort of having a little bit of a setback, and then just sort of thinking, okay, maybe it's going to be a few more months, and then sort of doubling down saying, okay, what am I besides just this athlete, right? Because boy, my CTL is almost 0 in Training Peaks. So, but am I still an athlete? Of course, I'm still an athlete, but I'm also these other things, and it's been a good chance just to step back and be like, okay, I can do lots of things. And what we'll talk about a little bit later is sort of fitness versus wellness, and my focus has really been about wellness. So anyway, my next one here it's called Connection Over Perfection. And this one comes from, I was talking to one of my athletes. He's a very disciplined triathlete. And like many of our triathletes, they're going into a fall marathon season. And so as we're talking through, you know, he does most of his triathlon training but by himself, like we all of us do. But then he said, hey, I got this group run on for Tuesday or something, and track workout with people. And I'm like, that's great. Let's just incorporate that. And then I'll just work out what you did during the track workout that week, and then we'll account for that later in the week. And then towards the end of the conversation, he said, well, there's a long run like on Saturday. And I'm like, you know what? Go for that too. And he's like, well, it may not be zone 2. And I'm like, that's fine. Like, go have fun with your friends. And so we just ended up with this schedule that's going to really be around, the focus is really on, you know, sort of social running, and it may not be the perfect zone 2 zones. That's okay, right? So there's going to be some Z3 in there, and that's fine. So I just really like this idea of connection over perfection.
Well, it's kind of like you can cross the finish line after the perfect build with no deviations and everything's great and amazing. And then what do you have? Like, you have a medal, you have a plaque or something. Is it really worth it? Whereas investing in relationships, if you can walk out of something, I think I've never, ever regretted doing something with friends, even if it wasn't the perfect workout. And that's something that I really think we can all be working on. And if you don't have a go-to group, you can find one. There are track clubs everywhere. There are run clubs, there are bike clubs, there's masters swim. Even just one person that you know that likes to do this, it is okay if it's not your perfect workout. And we as coaches can really help you integrate that. So definitely feel free to loop us in.
I think reflecting back on just this last year, or maybe the last 6 months of coaching, is that I think I've really advocated, you know, this connection over perfection for so many athletes. And I think in the past I wasn't as good. I was like, oh, no, don't go to the group workout. Now this year I'm like, go for it and have fun, because I just sort of see the benefits of it all. So, and that was sort of leads me to the next one, which is a sort of corollary, which is like play over performance. And it's kind of related to the same thing. But again, with this athlete, we're going over play over performance. And so I think just in general, I'm just trying to encourage my athletes this year to incorporate that more play. We've talked about how to do this before, but, you know, this is getting involved with other people. You can switch up your workout, your run workout from roads, go out into the trails. You can forget about pacing. Actually, I had an athlete this week who said, yeah, I had some run intervals and I had a choice halfway through my run to keep going flat or go to the hills and forget about pace and just go for the hills. And I was like, what a great call. Like, that was awesome. So he chose play during the workout, which was great. You know, you could play chase on the bike or you could play chase in the pool. There's all kinds of things you can do if you have a few friends around. So again, I love this idea of connection over perfection, play over performance.
Would you say that my Sea to Summit thing was play? You know, take a wrong turn and then chase for the whole race instead of leading from the front. I was just going for play. It was on purpose.
You're right. Yeah. Just having a good time out here. Right. Exactly. Yeah. We want to dig into like, what's that Garmin actually really doing? So
it's stimulating play. That's all it is.
Are we gonna have a segment on like how to load a route on your Garmin? Is that what we're gonna do?
Well, it starts with not taking the wrong turn out of T1. That's right. Step 1.
Okay, step 1. Okay, good. All right, good. And my last one here is combating these slushy stomachs. And I think I've just been seeing this a lot this year more. So we're really super fortunate to have a lot of 2 new types of liquid carbs on the market. I think like Scratch puts them out and UCAN and Martin puts all this stuff out. So it's now really easy to load up on, you know, 100 grams of carbs like in a bottle. But I am seeing a lot of folks getting like, yeah, my stomach has kind of got really, really sloshy when it came to the run. And so again, we talked about this before, but you can sort of go beyond the typical shot blocks and liquid and, you know, focus on regular foods like fig bars and cookies or brownies or banana bread or really anything, and just try to save the liquid and the gels for the run, because inevitably you're going to be doing easy to get sugar on the run. So anyway, I just advocate getting a little bit more real food if you can in your stomach on the bike.
And I will say a fig bar is a nice absorption for a sloshy stomach in addition to salt pills. So I was mixing up my Scratch Super Fuel with fig bars on the bike and had zero GI issues. Like my GI system was completely dormant for the whole race, which was awesome.
Well, and there you go. And you won. So this is a winning formula, right? That's it.
Exactly.
You've heard it here, folks. Like, that's it.
Exactly. Jim, I'm just seeing in our notes here, I actually forgot an insight from before that is so important that we have to do it. And I feel like this is actually a joint insight for us because we have to backtrack on something that we said on a previous podcast.
That's right. Oh, here we get to is this our Eat Our Words section of the podcast?
This is Eat Our Words and reserve the right to make a mistake.
Yeah, good. Okay, perfect.
Both segments. Okay, so we had a listener question. I'm going to say who it's from. It's from one of our athletes, Audrey, who I coach. And she was asking whether it's possible to be competitive in your age group in a 70.3 or an Olympic distance race, for example, top 3 qualifying for worlds, etc., on a road bike. And she's a nice road bike. I think it's a Trek road bike, and she's been riding it all the time. And we said that it was probably not possible to be competitive, but we want to backtrack on that and say, number one, on very hilly or technical courses, athletes with excellent fitness and bike handling skills can excel. And number two, if you're Audrey, you can do whatever you want, basically. So this is relevant because she raced me in 70.3. It'll be a couple weekends ago now, and this podcast airs. And she finished third in her age group and qualified for Worlds on a road bike. First and second did have TT bikes, but her bike was, I think, one of the best in the field. And it is a pretty hilly and technical course, but she's also a really great rider. So all this is to say, it is possible. Again, you want to have excellent bike handling skills and really good bike fitness, but just a huge shout out to Audrey, and also a congratulations to our friend and podcast listener we've mentioned many times, Jay Smitty, first in the 50 to 54 age group, has had an incredible career in triathlon and says she is now selling her TT bike. So we will see if that actually happens, but they and many other athletes really crushed it at this race. So congrats to everybody.
Yeah, and I'm following that. Yeah, so congrats to both Jay Smitty and Audrey. And Audrey's an outlier, so she can do what she wants. But certainly, I have an athlete who is doing a pretty long distance, I think it's an Olympic race in France. He's based in France. And so he was saying, hey, should I use my TT bike or my road bike? And of course, my response is going to emphatically be, of course you use your triathlon bike. What are you talking about? And then he sent me the course, and I was like, oh, right, this is France. Like, there's huge, huge, huge climbs, and it also means huge, huge, huge descents. And he's also a newer triathlete. So we were kind of looking at it and going, oh, wait, he has to go up 4,000 feet of climbing or something. It's really a lot, or maybe 3,000 in an Olympic. And so the result was, yeah, go ahead and use your road bike.
Totally. And I think another thing to be thinking about, I was thinking about this because I was watching the women's Olympic triathlon actually just today. And in Olympic triathlon, everyone has a road bike because it's draft legal, but the roads were incredibly wet. And so maybe, any other type of weird bike handling situation, again, there were a lot of crashes in that race because they were so wet. But when it gets super technical, if you feel super comfortable on a road bike and have better bike handling, I think that's maybe another reason to just consider whether it's worth it. And you can really upgrade your road bike too. Get fast aero wheels. If you put aero bars on there, there's ways to make it a lot faster.
Yeah, you can make a road bike as fast as a TT bike. You just need a little bit of extra work, but you can do it. And Amy, I was going to ask you, so does the winner of Sea to Summit get a bid for the Olympics in 2028? Is that true or not true? I tried Googling it. It was very unclear, so.
Well, so there's a petition basically to have this race that's like a swim, and then there's a bike where you bike south for like 10 minutes and you turn around and you bike north for 95 miles and then you ride up a mountain. And so it's sort of like, I would say it's 6 or 7, the next round of sports that will get added to the Olympics, but I am the first pick to the United States if it does go through. So.
Hey, listen, if they have an air rifle and skateboarding, they're going to have adventure racing, right? So
They better. I'm holding out hope for that very specialized skill.
That's right.
Okay, I'm going to segue us. We now have, in continuing our smorgasbord before we get to our main topic, we actually have some more reflections from our athletes at Ironman Lake Placid. So Ironman Lake Placid will never not be relevant on this podcast, but basically we recorded so soon after the race that we hadn't gotten all the feedback yet, and we also wanted to highlight some really important things that came out of that race for our athletes that I think are pretty relevant for other athletes who are racing. So I'm just read some quotes. We can maybe go back and forth on these, Jim. The first one has to do with going by feel during an Ironman, and we talk a lot about how data can be really useful, but one of our athletes said, at the half marathon mark, my watch ran out of battery. This was a blessing in disguise because I had to run on RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion, which helped pace myself pretty nicely. And I think there are times in a race where, whether it's on purpose or not, it can be useful to kind of go by feel and without data. We've talked about how if data is not serving you, if it's just making you feel really, really bad, that's a reason to maybe not look at it so much. And I find that actually after you kind of get through the first 20 to 30 minutes of the bike, usually everybody kind of just settles to where they need to be and what they can sustain. And I think it's pretty common to feel like I don't have more than one pace right now. Like in an Ironman, you're usually just running the pace that you have that day or biking the pace that you have. So again, useful to make sure you're not spiking out of control. But I do think there is something to be said here for not having data in some circumstances.
Yeah, I think it's just really funny. This funny progression we see is that we have maybe new athletes who come to us and maybe they've been doing everything by RPE, but it's not quite calibrated correctly because maybe they're in zone 3 all the time. And so then we spend a lot of time recalibrating them back and saying easy is easy and hard is hard and trying to recalibrate that RPE using data, using heart rate primarily or a power. And they do that for a while. And after a certain amount of volume, right, they then come back to being like, oh, okay, you can go by RPE because now you understand what a zone 2 is, or just like you say, you just settled in and you understand where things are now. And this comment came from somebody he's a very experienced runner. So I'm not surprised that he was able to fall back on RPE and say, okay, yeah, I pretty much know where I'm at.
Yep, agree that you kind of have to earn that. So work with it for a little while, use the data, but then as you get more and more experienced, it can be okay to kind of let it back off. And also maybe the lesson is don't freak out if your watch runs out of battery. That doesn't mean that you have run out of battery. You actually can still run. It's okay. Don't worry about Strava. It will be fine.
I had a series of Olympic races for a couple of years. My power meter would always work perfectly. And then literally every time I jumped on my bike for the race, it would not work. And so it came to the point where it happened like 3 or 4 times in a row. I thought, okay, well, that's fine. Like, it's just not going to work. And I was like pleasantly surprised that my power meter somehow did work. But otherwise I was like, it's RPE, baby. Here we go. So,
and you still crossed the finish line, right? We'll take it.
Somehow I made it. Wow. Okay. The next one here is the highs and lows. You can feel terrible at mile 4 and great at mile 18. So this same athlete said, I started cramping pretty much from the start. So this is where the mental game started. I knew it was going to be uncomfortable for a long time. So I focused on taking in the course and the energy in town. Just fantastic. I had to improvise and started drinking 2x the electrolytes and calf gels that I had budgeted. But by the half marathon mark, I was feeling better. And what a great insight. And he's actually a newer triathlete as well too. So this is very mature and just thinking on the fly.
Yeah, and I think you don't want to let yourself get into a negative spiral of like, my day is over. This is bad. I can find that can happen maybe at the end of the bike we've talked about before, where if you're hurting so much, you're like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, how I'm going to run a marathon or a half marathon, whatever your race is. And so just think about, it might get better. Let me do a task that will try to make it feel better. Let me eat something, drink something, walk for a minute, whatever that is. Just know that it's not always going to be downhill forever in terms of how you're feeling.
I like that maxim. It's like, it's almost never going to get worse, which is when you're really, really low, it's like you could say to yourself, this is not really going to get worse. And oftentimes it's definitely not going to get worse. It's going to get better.
Definitely. Next one here. So the point that bike handling can be scary on crowded courses, and also triathletes are generally not great bike handlers. That is not true for many of our triathletes because we practice and we ride in groups and we do road bikes and everything. But in general, I would say the modal triathlete at an Ironman is not very good. So another athlete said, maybe this is normal, but I was passing people the entire bike course. So this definitely brought an additional mental load. 700 new participants this year from what I heard. I also saw some close calls from people passing on the right side, which made me ultra vigilant. So just be aware that even if there are no cars on the course, it can be dangerous out there, and you have to be aware of your surroundings because people might be doing some pretty crazy things. People might try to draft off you. There are rules. Many people don't listen to them. So just make sure that you're super aware of your surroundings and don't trust that just because there aren't cars, you don't have to be aware.
Yeah, I'm always just a little bit surprised on the bike, just the crazy things that people do. I think just in some ways, like maybe the mental overload for people, just like they don't think about who's, behind them or next to them or something. And just people do about crazy stuff, like just pushing over quickly to the left. And you're like, whoa, hold on, God. Like, there's other people in this race. First, I thought these people were just so rude. But I think at this point, really, there's most people just very mentally overloaded and they just don't have a space to think about. Like, there's maybe somebody to my left, but I'm going to go passing on the left. So I'm going to be a little bit more gentle with my assessments of my fellow athletes.
Yeah. I mean, everybody is usually having a tough time in some way. So it's hard to extend empathy in that moment or kindness, but it is meaningful to do. And I will say, actually, this reminds me of another insight from Sea to Summit. I was biking along and I was like, okay about having gotten lost. This was still pretty early on in the bike, but I wasn't thrilled about the situation. And so I was just like pretty serious. And I'm biking along, and then this girl just turns to me and she says, hey, I love your kit. And I was like, what? I was passing her like way fast. And then I just turned back and I was like, thanks, I love your kid too. And then just kept going. So anytime, that really did just like shake me out of whatever headspace I was in for that second. So it is helpful to be kind to other people.
So you screamed, on your left, really aggressively. And she turned and goes, I like your kid. You're like, whoa, hold on, sister.
I mean, that's almost exactly what happened. So yeah. All right, next one here. So this is awesome. This is about hitting mental low points during a race and finding the mental tools to continue. So a shout out to one of our athletes, Charlie, who sent this in, and he described a situation where lining up in the corral, he realized that he didn't have his timing chip. And so he wrote a lot about it. I'll paraphrase a little bit, but he said, the internal spiral starts and I called myself every name in the book, disorganized piece of shit, and it only gets worse from there. The day before, I misplaced my bike computer, and this only amplified the negative emotions. Bike computer was later to be found in my road shoes. As I'm swarmed with people, my first ever big boy panic attack hits, and I can feel my mind hit the eject button and think that my day is over before it even started. I was very lucky to find an absolute angel of a security guard who let me on the beach as the pros started. I find the right volunteers that handle the ship, tell me it's going to be okay, and send me on my way. As I line up in the crowd, I go back to breathing and mindfulness exercises, standing tall on your feet, long and slow breaths in and out. I acknowledge that things aren't going to plan, but I mentally throw away all of the earlier dread and anxiety. I have a chip, I'm good to race, and nothing else matters now. Athletes are everywhere, and at this point, I'm just begging to be in the water. Time starts to slow down, but I'm eventually within sight of the water. As I head into the lake, I'm thanking every single one of my village by name. I'm remembering how much unconditional love, words, support, and sacrifice I've received to be here at this moment.
This is a pro move right here on so many levels, isn't it?
Yeah, once again, Charlie needs a book deal about his Ironman journey.
Yeah, he does, exactly.
But I think here, yeah, it's so tough when something shakes you early on. This kind of relates to my race experience as well, where I really needed to mentally recalibrate. And it's so easy to just have this negative spiral and start that negative self-talk. But being able to acknowledge, like, this isn't actually serving me, and then move towards the tasks, finding a volunteer saying, hey, I lost my timing chip, knowing that this is something that has probably happened to dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of Ironman racers before. And then as soon as you calibrate, just moving back to the things that matter. I really want to commend Charlie for being able to come back from a mental low point, because I think it's really easy to let that derail your race before it's even begun.
Yeah, it's that absolute sickening feeling, like you say, either taking a wrong turn or losing your chip or something, and there's like the blood just drains from your face, and then how do you come back from that? Just resetting, like, okay, so both you guys just recalibrated so quickly. And again, I think just a shout out to all the work that we've done, individually and with our athletes this year, just like lots of mental training. And I really feel like has serving our athletes so well in so many of these race situations.
Definitely. And one thing I'll add about this too is both of these situations, so me getting lost and then Charlie losing a timing chip, it sucks because it has very little to do with all the work you did to prepare for your race. Like, it's one thing if, your run pace isn't coming together, for example, or you can't hit your bike watts, or you decide to not fuel and you mess up your nutrition. But these feel like these things that you just don't spend a lot of time thinking about, like, oh, what if I get lost, or what if I lose my timing chip? So I find that sometimes that can be even more destabilizing. But just telling yourself, like, unexpected things can happen, and that's by definition, like, you may not expect what they're going to be. I didn't expect that my aero bar was going to break or whatever that is, but just know that you can use the exact same tools for things that you have expected and visualize. You can always just say, what task do I need to do right now, and how am I going to approach this mentally, and what emotions are actually serving me?
We have more Charlie goodness here. Should we continue on with Charlie?
Go for it.
All right. So Charlie says, right as I entered the change tent to get ready to run, I heard the pros crossing the finish line. This was a pretty big mind fuck. I couldn't really wrap my head around the fact that these guys are done and I have an entire marathon to go. Should never be worried about them, but in the moment, it was pretty discouraging.
Yeah, I feel that. It's tough because the pros, first of all, they do start earlier than the rest of the field, but just telling yourself they're professionals and they do this as a career and their times are going to be different is, I think, maybe something a little bit helpful. Like, think of them as completely a different species doing a different race, because that's essentially what they are compared to the age groupers. But it's hard. I want to validate that hearing that happen is a big way to just put the time of the day into perspective. And I find that can be really challenging too, especially on courses that are loops, where you can just be starting the run and you can see the people that are coming down the finish line. That one definitely hurts.
For sure, yeah.
One more from Charlie here. So shout out to Charlie. He talked about some of a GI situation. And he basically said the idea that, quote, if you have GI issues, your day is effectively over, was echoing through my head. And he had said that he basically started getting really nauseous and throwing up. And he said, I couldn't think of anything except the nausea that I was feeling. I was ready to turn in my timing chip. I kept checking in with myself and asked if the pain of quitting was better than the pain of continuing. It had unfortunately reached that point. Despite the pain, I tried to smile and say thank you to every volunteer or spectator I walked past. Gratitude and positivity are part of who we are, so if I can still live that out, then I can probably keep going. Also, if you can still talk, you're not hurting that bad. Another Steve Magnus banger. Eventually, the logical part of my brain took over. I tried to avoid letting numbers do the driving, but I checked my watch and heart rate, and pace looked great when I was actually able to jog. My heart and lungs wanted so badly to give it to me. In addition, I know from experience that GI issues don't resolve anytime soon or with the wave of a magic wand. Even if I quit, I won't feel better immediately. If I'm going to suffer, I might as well walk it into the halfway mark and reevaluate. And I think this is really valuable because many people experience GI issues in races, but Charlie here outlines a strategy for how to think about it is, number one, start saying thank you to people. Walk, move forward, do whatever you can. And number two, realize that you're not going to feel better immediately if you quit. You're still going to feel pretty terrible for a little while. So you can feel terrible sitting down or you can feel terrible walking. And I think the pain of quitting definitely does hurt a little bit unless you really have to. So being able to just keep moving forward is really, really important.
That's really great advice. I love how he started with gratitude first, because I think that some ways it sort of pulls you out of your own headspace for a minute and just allows you to sort of have a real interaction with people. And then just sort of taking in that energy of the spectators and the crowd and your fellow competitors. So again, shout out to Charlie. What words of wisdom from him?
All right, Jim, you want to take us to the last one?
Okay, so last one is, it's a little bit different. This was from a DNF experience and could be useful to read this. And, a lot of people don't finish, right? So as we going back to the beginning here, like Ironman is hard. So this is from our athlete who said, Jim promised a very sore butt by 80 miles, but that was the least of my issues. I cramped up big time, quads, hamstrings, and just couldn't shake it. That never happened to me before, and I had no karma for that. I could walk, but not pedal up any sort of incline. I was around 245, so getting through the bike before the cutoff was very much in play. But after the 30 to 45 minutes of finagling up on and off the bike with plenty of walking and trying to play catch up with fluids and electrolytes, I set my sights on 2025. It was after 6 when we finally rolled in the, quote, loser van. Okay, that's a little strong. Like the van that transports inmates from the county jail. My family was relieved to see me, having spent 2 hours in a fruitless search to try to find where I was and how I was. I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm one step closer to getting one of those finisher jerseys. Congratulations to all of you. I tried this race in 2017 for the first time, and the song blasting at the swim start that year was "What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Stronger." The older and wiser I get, the more I find that to be true.
Wow. Well, thank you, Paul, so much for sharing that. And kudos for even towing the line. These races are so hard, and getting through the swim and any amount of the bike, or really even just getting to the starting line, is such a big deal. As coaches, I mean, we love it when our athletes have great days at races, but we are the most proud just when they toe the line, when they get there, they make it to that point. Whether or not you actually cross the finish line is not a reflection on like who you are as an athlete or a person. It's just a lot of variables that are inside and outside of our control. So it's good to have this perspective and know that not everyone's going to have a perfect day all the time, but it is very true. It sounds like a cliche, but if it doesn't kill you, it will make you stronger. And really proud of Paul for just saying like, yeah, I'm going to get this eventually, and it might not be this year, but I'll be back.
Yeah, I think Paul's already looking at to 2025. So yeah, shout out to Paul. We're all behind you, and I know he has it in him to finish this Ironman. And I think this is maybe his third crack at it, but I think number 4 is going to be the one.
All right, well, that was a ton of good insights, and we will, of course, keep talking about Lake Placid probably forever. So if you're here for that content, stick around. But for now, we're going to segue into our main topic, which is particularly relevant to me right now, as well as our Lake Placid athletes and many, many other athletes who are wrapping up their A races for the season. And so our main topic is how to recover like a pro and why we actually need an off season. So Jim, I'm going to let you take the wheel for this one and tell us a little bit about what the off season is and why we need one and what it should look like. Because I don't know about you, all of my athletes are already sending me like, I registered for Ironman Lake Placid 2025 and can we start today? And I'm like, no, we can't actually. So I will let you take the wheel.
Sure. Or we have athletes who are like saying, my race season, my triathlon season's over, but now I'm doing a fall marathon. And I'm like, okay, great. It's going to be awesome to do a fall marathon. Most of them are in November, of course, New York and other ones. But then, the bad news I haven't told these athletes is that your December and January is going to look real light. So if those folks are listening, you're going to get a little preview of what's coming up. And the smart folks are taking it now. So anyway, I just found this quote from Plato, which I thought we kick it off with, which was, have you noticed how a lifelong devotion to physical exercise to the exclusion of anything else produces a certain type of mind, excessive emphasis on athletics produces an excessively uncivilized type.
Oof, that cuts deep, Plato.
That does. Yeah, Plato dropping in the ancient wisdom here. So there we go. I think we just discovered why we need an off season. So, but anyway, we pulled a few other ideas. Alan Cousins has a really great blog. It's called The Off Season is the Most Important Phase of All. And so he starts that blog with a quote also from Peter Coe, who's a legendary run coach. And he said, resuming training too early is much like pulling an onion out of the garden and realizing it is not yet fully grown. One cannot put it back in and expect more growth.
That's another banger from Peter Coe there. And I think if you feel the urge to get back into training and start doing threshold intervals 2 weeks after your A race, just think of the onion. And you are the onion, and you can't go back in once you're out of the ground. So remember the onion.
Yeah, so after race, we say after your A race and, the 12 weeks of specific training, your body and mind, need a much needed break. And for many athletes, they've been training seriously for 9 months and also for years, honestly, for this A race. So this is a huge ask on the body and the mind. And if you just think about so for example, the specific period alone is a major, major stressor. Like your brain, the central nervous system and the peripheral system, the muscles and tendons, and the metabolic system are under constant stress and demands for that last 12 weeks and 3 months. And also during this time, you're probably chronically dehydrated and glycogen depleted and probably have some level of compromised sleep. Does that sound familiar, Katie?
Me, sleep issues? No, never. I sleep like a baby for 12 hours every night. I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly right. Especially during this specific period when you have major intervals and big days.
Yeah. And especially the night after my A race. Definitely. Yeah. Carry on, Jim. Nothing here for me.
And you're always hydrated and you're never hungry, right? So yes. So it's really, actually, it was really interesting thinking about this, thinking about okay, 3 months out of 12 months, that's such a huge part of the year to sort of just be under constant stress. And so in sum, you need a serious break from the grind, and the off season allows for this metabolic reset, muscle repair, and the needed break for your brain and your central nervous system, and to sort of let your hormones come back into play. And so we take this off season to shed all the acute and, more importantly, our chronic stress. And when we say acute stress, or fatigue, that's usually the stuff that you feel I feel tired and I had a hard workout yesterday, I'm a little bit sore, this and that. And maybe that acute goes away, often goes away when we taper into, say, maybe a B race or something, right? But there's other sort of lower layer, deeper layer, which we call this chronic fatigue. And that's stuff that we as triathletes or ultra runners, whatever it is, our athletes, we get really good at ignoring. We really just don't feel the chronic fatigue. And so when we go into these big tapers, our athletes I feel great, 1 week out from my race. I'm yeah, but we're still dropping a lot of that chronic fatigue that you just don't feel, right? So while we may feel recovered after 2 or 3 weeks of an off season, we should take at least up to 8 weeks to shed all of that chronic fatigue. And, if you continue to carry over even just a few percent of fatigue year after year, this accumulates in your body and it makes it impossible year after year to improve.
Yeah, and I think I really resonated with something that Alan was saying in the blog post, where basically there's 3 different levels of recovery. And the first one is just glycogen replenishment. So after a big race, you're going to be in the hole with fueling because you've burned a lot of glycogen. You need to replenish that, but you can do that just by eating in a couple of days. But then there's this second layer that's kind of muscle repair and mitochondrial repair. And that might take, say, a matter of weeks. You're getting rid of all that soreness and that tightness. But then the one that I think triathletes ignore is this deeper central nervous system reset, as well as a hormonal reset. And again, that's not something you might feel so much acutely. It might manifest as sleep issues, or I was talking about experiencing fatigue. Maybe that was part of it. In general, that's something that's a little bit harder to identify and takes so much longer to rebuild. So that's what we're angling for. We're not getting to the point where you're not sore anymore, because you're going to feel like that in just a couple of weeks. We need to be doing this deep under the surface recovery that is a little bit harder to grasp tangibly, but I think is actually the most important one out of the 3.
Yeah, I agree. I think, when we look at this, the brain is this master controller of your body. And I don't think we often think about our brain training, but we always think, oh, it's physical. It's my legs and it's my lungs and it's my zone 2 and this and that. But really, it's your brain is really controlling this entire operation, right? So training is really just a way to challenge your mind, and it's super taxing, on your brain to continue to do swim, bike, run, strength, and all this other stuff all the time. So it's just why it's so important to not, I always say, I don't want you to think like an athlete during the off season. And really what we're trying to say here is that, because the brain's primary job is to assess this threat state, right? And so internally and externally, and that's, our brain is here to keep us alive. That's primarily what it's doing all the time. And so off season really starts with giving your brain a chance to stay out of that high stress and that high readiness state that we're definitely in that last 3 months.
And we can say thank you to that high stress state because it does get us through the training that we have to do. Like, we're making it sound really bad, but in some sense it is required to get through your week 4 race sim and then even toe the line at the race day. But the point is that it can't be a constant state. And that's why we protect the specific prep phase and race season as something very, very specific and something that cannot be your state all the time.
Right. So we always come back to that key principle, like stress plus rest equals growth, but also like your body can only progress when it's trained under a novel stimulus. So if you continue to pound your body in mind with stress, like, it will become desensitized to it and stop responding. So there's but this is happy medium here. Like, we got to have some stress and rest and growth, but we can't have it like all the time.
Yep. And I like your note here. This is super important, but often the primary reasons that athletes don't actually end up progressing in the next season is that, number one, they didn't take an off season, or number two, they continued to train race or specific efforts in their off season. You shouldn't be doing any of this during the off season, which I think segues us pretty nicely into talking about what you're actually supposed to do during the off season, because a lot of people are like, does that mean I can't go outside for the next 3 months? And the answer is no, you actually can go outside, but it's going to be a little bit different than what we've been doing.
You don't just say, you're grounded, young lady.
It feels like I'm grounded.
You will not leave your room until you do your homework.
Exactly.
I really like thinking about sort of, off season is turning the focus from fitness to wellness. And I think this wellness equates to like overall good health. And, as we know, fitness at times can be at odds with general overall health. I think it mostly is a positive and it contributes, but there are times, again, I think probably at the end of a long season where fitness is really not serving us very well. And we really want to turn the focus to wellness.
Exactly. And so what wellness can look like in practice, if you want to do it with data, is actually embracing zone 1. So that's about 60% of your max heart rate or below it is the zone below zone 2. Jamie, you've talked about doing a lot of zone 1 as you've recovered from your injury, but some examples here, it doesn't have to be swim, bike, run. And I think it's often even better if you just take a step back from always making swim, bike, run your primary exercise modalities. Again, an easy spin on a mountain bike or a chill swim in a lake, all that's like totally fine. But we like examples like just taking a walk or hiking or paddleboarding, kayaking, gardening, anything that really is active recovery. And this is an awesome time too to really invest in doing those things with other people who maybe you weren't paddleboarding with your family as much during your days where you had to get a 6-hour ride in. But this is an amazing time to do that. And they, I'm sure, will appreciate it because you've been spending a lot of time on Ironman.
I think most of us also are wearing these wrist heart rate monitors nowadays. And I know they're not always that accurate, the wrist stuff, but I think at the lower intensities, they kind of are. And so I've been seeing just a lot of like, your heart rate is 100 to 110. It's like, okay, that's zone 1. Like, it's perfect. Like a great little hike around the neighborhood or something, or walking the dog or whatever it is, or maybe mowing the lawn. And I'm like, oh, I'm right where I'm supposed to be. That is zone 1. That is so cool.
Exactly. So then after you've been doing this for a little while, where should we be thinking about strength training? Does that fit into this active recovery time?
I think so. Yeah, I think we start off with some sort of light strengths and some mobility exercises after a few weeks in that zone 1. And I think, you and I talked about, we love our strength, and this is a great time to sort of begin to think about, off season is to get stronger. I wouldn't jump right back into it, but certainly that should be a part of your off season and then also your base season as well. But, generally what we're looking for is that we just don't want any structured workouts in like the following 8 weeks from your A race.
Definitely. And I'll say an advantage, so I work closely with a strength coach, and I think an advantage of that is you can actually think about periodizing your strength training in different ways. So when I was prepping for CETA Summit, we were doing all of these very power-based exercises that were getting me ready to pass 5 women in the last, few minutes of this race. But now what we're working on is basically some postural corrections or different technique things and flexibility. And I think it's interesting because the whole season, every single time I went in to see my physical therapist, it was like, yep, my pelvis is a little tweaked and my upper back is tight, and we're going to be reactive about that. But this is the time of year to actually be proactive about injuries and say, okay, how can I actually align my body and strengthen it in such a way that I won't experience the same issues next season? So again, plugging strength trainers, but there's also ways for you to just figure out what are my imbalances and how can I work on them. But you don't need to be doing like your max deadlift at this time. It is definitely not the time for that if you're trying to recover actively.
What's so funny, when we were writing the notes for this, I was writing this, light strength and mobility exercises. And I thought, okay, how many athletes do I have? And how many of them actually would go into the weight room and overlift and go too heavy? And I thought, oh, I don't think I have anybody who does that. So I was like, do I have to even put this in as a warning to not, like, in your off season, don't go lift heavy? Because I don't know if I have anybody who really does go lift heavy unless they're like, herded into unless I really like pounded into them or something. So
that is the classic triathlete. So if this isn't you, just keep doing what you're doing.
Exactly.
It's fine.
Exactly right. Endurance athletes unite. And don't go to the weight room. So
next point here, this is huge. It should go without saying, but this is a great time to focus on sleep and rest and fueling and hydration. I think it's important actually to bring this out because a lot of people might let these things go to the wayside a little bit because they're not training at the same volume. But in fact, it's just as important. So you need to be fueling super, super well to kind of replenish everything that you've lost. And know that you're actually still kind of burning glycogen when you're in zone 1, especially if you're being particularly active. It's easy to be really active in the summer. And I think maybe we underestimate what we're doing. So don't think that just because you're not doing the same huge expenditure, you don't need to be fueling. I think honestly, maybe one of the only big differences that you'll see in your fueling game is no, you don't need to consume 80 grams of carbs per hour while gardening. Like, probably not. I mean, it depends how aggressively you garden. But like your 3 meals a day and your snacks, all that stuff should probably be about the same. And just make sure that you're staying on top of it because you want to feel strong once we get back into some more general training later in the season.
Are you saying I don't need a bottle of UCAN when I'm out on the ride around tractor? I can't believe it. What? What am I going to drink?
I mean, I will say my dad is big into chainsawing, as you know, Jim. Others know this. And I was telling him, like, Dad, you're out there for 8 hours, probably in zone 1 too. You need Element, like, got to get you on the scratch train. And so he's an avid podcast listener. And so shout out to Dad. I'm sure he's going to be checking it out real soon.
Bruce Clayton, sweating hard. He does need Element for sure.
All right. Next tip here for your recovery time, mental recovery. So I think it's important to try to switch off that athlete brain that's always chasing fitness. And some tips for doing that: more reading, more social connection. Think about limiting social media, which I like your note here, Jim, the modern cigarette. I believe that. And I will say too, if it's tough for you, like, hey, Strava breaks, not a bad thing ever. You can log all your gardening and your tractors if you want to, but you don't have to do that. And if you find that it's hard to see in Training Peaks or on Strava your fitness going down, turn off the data. It's going to go down. That is the point. You want it to actually go down quite a bit because that is creating room for it to go up. But if it's hard for you to see that, then I think it's important to just kind of limit it from what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Next one here, get some body work. So I'm a big fan of sports massage, physical therapist, sports chiro. You may need multiple sessions. This feels particularly relevant to me right now because I've been doing it all the time this week to try to get myself to recover. But I think just, again, even though you're not doing the same level of super intense training, this stuff can be really, really good for just keeping your body happy. So that can help you recover like a pro. And then our last thing here is thinking about gadgets and gear. So Jim, is there anything that you think all of our athletes should get that can really optimize their recovery and help them in the off season? Or do you think it's kind of all a little bit woo-woo?
Yeah, it's interesting you say, because I wanted to sort of emphasize that there are some really cool gadgets out there, and both you and I own these gadgets, and they're kind of fun, but obviously emphasizing, sleep and recovery and less social media, that kind of stuff. Obviously, those are the big things, but, the marginal things, I think, Normatec boots are amazing, and I have a pair, and I recently got a pair for, actually, you can get some around your waist as well, too, and that's been really nice for recovery. The Hypervolt, I call it the Pounder. We talked about that. Maybe it's been a gear pick of the week as well. And then your standard just, foam roller, or just things like ice bath and sauna, steam room. So these are all good things, but they're not really fundamental things. They're just this kind of sort of nice to have.
Mm-hmm. And I think actually some of these, maybe not all of them, but some of them might be just forcing you to invest time in your recovery, which you might not otherwise do. So if I put my Normatec boots on, I'm like, okay, I'm investing time in like sitting, and maybe I'm reading or something, or I'm watching the Olympics, whatever it is. But I think it's easier otherwise to just be like sitting in a chair. Yeah, Normatec boots are way better than sitting in a chair for recovery. But anything that forces you to allocate time is probably worth your while. And there's quite the spectrum of how expensive those things can get. So Hypervolt's probably on the foam rollers on the lowest end, and everyone can get that, moving up to Normatec boots and your own sauna or steam room, which I don't have, but could be nice.
Exactly right. I open that up for Santa. But back to the Normatec boots. Yeah, one thing you can do is just pretty similar, which is free, which is put your legs up all the way up on the wall, and just straight on the wall, and let all that stuff drain downwards. So that's another way to be sort of the poor person's Normatec boots, but highly effective, very, very effective.
Yep.
So
yep, and breathe deeply while you do it. That's also free.
There you go. Exactly.
Fox breathing. All right. Well, that is our quick deep dive on the off season. I am excited to be starting this out. So I will let everyone know how my gardening is doing. I'm actually doing some river tubing coming up soon and some horseback riding. I'm going on a family trip, so that's going to be my fully embracing active recovery lifestyle, but I will let everyone know how that goes. And I think we have a couple listener questions, so why don't we jump into that? The first one is, how do you get into triathlon as a brand new beginner? So someone asked me this question recently. They were looking for advice as a marathon runner looking to switch to triathlon. What resources should they be looking at? What should they be thinking about? So I might start out with just a list of basic gear items. Again, this is the very most basic list. There's a very long gear list on our website that has more fancy things, but to complete a triathlon, you do need a bike and a helmet, running shoes, goggles, a cap, a swimsuit or tri-kit, whatever you're gonna wear to swim in. And just with that, you actually can do a sprint tri. So I think if you're a brand new beginner, consider getting access to those things. You could even borrow a bike or something just to make sure that you have what you need. Second thing I would say is learn about zone 2. I think no matter what, that is going to be foundational for any type of endurance sport. Again, you can sort of half-ass it and get through it, but if you want to build any career in endurance sports, you want to learn about zone 2. And my third piece of advice is sign up for swim lessons if you're not experienced at all. A lot of people have really no expertise swimming, so getting even just a couple lessons is valuable. And get comfortable riding a bike outside if you haven't. There's many people out there who haven't ridden a bike outside since they were kids and maybe ride a Peloton or go to a spin class, but it's not the same. So just take your bike and ride around the block and make sure that you feel comfortable doing that, because it is very different to ride outside than inside.
Yeah, this is a hard question to answer, because you start saying, well, then you need a Garmin and then you need so-and-so, and you're okay, hold on, wait, where do we draw the line? So I really like this list because it is, like you say, like you can do a sprint triathlon with just this stuff and you don't need all the fancy gadgets. And I had an athlete who was a new athlete interview and had asked me, he said, we weren't sure if they really wanted to tackle triathlon. They're like, they haven't done a triathlon. They're not really familiar with all three sports. And they were saying, like, I want something more in my life. I want, I know there's something greater out there, and triathlon just keeps coming up over and over again, but I'm not really sure I really want to do this. I want to commit to it. So I just said, okay, well, if you came on as a new athlete now, this is what I'd have you do. And I just said, okay, here's a 30-day challenge for you if you're interested in triathlon. I said, I want you to do 3 30-minute runs. I want you to do 3 30-minute to 60-minute bikes, and I want you to go to the pool 1 or 2 times a week. And I want to do that for the next 30 days. And then we're going to come back, and at the end of the 30 days, we're going to come back, we're going to reconnect. I'm going to say, okay, how did you do? Did you enjoy, or did you even do the 3 runs, the 3 bikes, and did you get to the pool once or twice a week? And so we're just really trying period here, and I'll report back on how this athlete did, but I just think that everybody can take that away. If you are interested in triathlon, just start really easy, some really easy training, and see if this is something that calls to you still, or you say, oh my gosh, I'm going to go off and be, a professional pickleball player.
I might be a professional pickleball player, actually. I'm considering that, just for the record. But no, I think this is fantastic. And I think too, if you're in that process and you go to the pool once and you're like, oh, absolutely not, this is not for me, that's really valuable to know. Maybe your sport is duathlon, or maybe you're going to stay a runner, or maybe you're going to get into cycling. But again, not signing up for an Ironman is your first thing, especially if you haven't done these steps. I think this was super smart of your prospective client to just come in and be like, hey, I'm not sure, and then give this a try. And honestly, if they did this, the 3 by 30-minute runs, 3 by 30 to 60 bikes, and 1 to 2 times per week in the pool, they'd probably be well on their way to a sprint triathlon by the month. Like, that's a great kind of month intro, especially if you have some base fitness. So I think this is fantastic, and we'll be passing this on. All right, so 2 more quick segments. Challenge of the week. Can't believe I haven't said this before. I probably have said it in injury prevention episodes, but your challenge is do a little pre-run glute activation. So I'm going to link some bands in the show notes and a video for that. There's a lot of different videos online, but just spending about 5 minutes on glute activation before a run or even before a ride is really valuable, because triathletes and runners often really neglect that side-to-side motion. And a lot of people have different pelvic imbalances, or maybe they're rotated a little bit, or their legs are different lengths, whatever that is. It's super, super easy to develop IT band issues, knee issues, etc. And one of the best ways to work against that is just make sure that your glutes are firing before you go, and glute activation can help you do that. So if you can insert this to, especially before your hard runs or your long runs, but really before any run, anytime you can do it in the day is really valuable. But I would recommend doing that before you go out.
And also, one of the cool things about this is you're probably going to run, 10, 15 seconds a mile faster at the same effort too as well. So you switch everything on, like, oh my gosh, like some days you're like, why am I going so much faster? And it's like, oh, because probably you're just activated.
Definitely. Yeah. So this is a nice way for free speed. Love it.
So my challenge of the week is just to practice 1-minute walking on your long runs to simulate aid stations. And also, it's a great way to say, if you are running, over an hour and a half or even maybe 2 hours, like we always advocate, like take a little break. Because, oftentimes in Ironman or even in, ultra runs or marathons, you're going to be walking at some point. So why not give yourself a little break and just, simulate that during your long runs?
Can I add a suggestion? You can also scream ice, ice as you're doing this.
Just out of nowhere, like around the neighborhood. Just like who's the crazy person out there screaming ice, right?
Ice, Gatorade.
And they brought cups with them too. They were throwing them on the ground. So I think we're calling the cops this littering person, Every Sunday they were throwing cups on the disposable cups, small cups on the ground.
You have to perfect it. You really do. I will say, actually, one more insight I still got him from Sea to Summit is I was doing bottle handoffs with Connor, and it was really fun for me to just throw the bottle at him right before I took a new one. He took a lot of bottles kind of to the body, to the head during this process. I was like, sorry. And then I'd grab the next one. But we hadn't practiced. So maybe if I'd practiced it beforehand, we would have been even better.
So is that Roland, is your gear pick of the week then like a hockey mask for him? Is that what you're saying?
That's a really good one. Yeah, I'm going to backtrack on. And actually, no, here's my gear pick of the week. So it was actually cheap Amazon bike bottles that work well and can get lost on race day. So I ordered a bunch of these because I just needed more bike bottles. So I'm linking some that are like $7, but I'm special at linking them because they're super fun to throw. So you could just throw them in your backyard. You can throw them at your husband. You could throw them at your friends. You can throw them out the window. That's what we're here for. This is all Z1 Active Recovery, is just throwing the bottles around.
Exactly right. Well, my gear pick of the week, we have these aero bottles, right? And they're always like sometimes they're kind of sketchy and they fall off or they get loose, that kind of stuff. And so I kind of thought this was sort of over because I've had this happen to me a bunch, but I haven't raced in a while. And one of my athletes just this week said, oh my God, my aero bottle was all janky and it was rattling around. And I remembered I used to go buy these like some very specialized big rubber bands from like Profile Designs, and it probably cost me, $40 for 2 rubber bands, but like you had to have the rubber bands. And of course I went onto Amazon and I found these large rubber bands. You could get like 20 for like $3. So I put a link on there to those, but they're actually really handy to have around if you have a TT bike with any kind of water bottles. Like the rubber band, yeah, it's not always pro, but boy, when you wrap a couple of rubber bands around your front water bottle like that, it's not going anywhere.
And this is a plug for, there's so many things out there where they market the sports version and it's like super expensive, and then you get the non-sports version. Like I was thinking about this with Stroop waffles. You can get like a fancy Honey Stinger Stroop waffle and it's like $4 for one. And then you go to Trader Joe's and you get Stroop waffles, like the kind that comes in a bag, or you go on an airplane and United Airlines gives you a Stroop waffle and you're like, this is the same nutritional content. So you can just collect them from United Airlines instead of spending $4 on a Honey Stinger.
Yeah, spend like $700 on a plane ticket to get free. And that works out really well. But this goes in with my bugaboos is that so Untap, they're a local Vermont company. We, maple syrup, we all love it. We're New Englanders, that kind of stuff. But I figured out one time that the price per gallon for Untapped little packet is like $300 per gallon. So, or you can just go get maple syrup at your supermarket for, I don't know, $40 a gallon and just pour it into a flask.
Yep. You can go to your local CVS and get a shampoo bottle and put it right in there, one of those squeezies, exactly. And then you're perfect.
Perfect.
Reusable,
exactly.
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Travel size, it goes through TSA. Perfect. Everybody wins. Okay.
Amazing. All right. Well, this has been a super fun one. Thank you for indulging my continued reflections on Sea to Summit and both of our reflections on Lake Placid. We will be back again next week with another episode. And as always, we're just super grateful for the listener engagement. So send us your questions, your comments, and your ratings and reviews.
Katie, again, congratulations. Winner, chicken dinner. And look forward to the next one. And thanks, peeps. See you later.